I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I want to make sure that this is the actual right one. Yes. All right. So we are going to start from the beginning. So first of all, I want to thank you for attending this meetup, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come, to come and learn some concepts that pertain to unrealistic expectations. Uh, I have a course that I'll talk about at the end, an online course called Get Real, Deal, and Heal. And basically, one of the negative behavioral patterns that most people have and don't realize that they do is having unrealistic expectations. And the antidote for unrealistic expectations is gratitude. Okay. But I'll go over that at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, and you could see what the Get Real, Deal, and Heal course is all about. Okay. I always start off with a disclaimer because I think it's important to let people know that I am not a medical doctor or a psychologist or a therapist. I am a coach. Okay. I'm certified in positive psychology, transformational mindset work, and integrative nutrition. Okay. So I don't want this to be construed or substituted as psychological counseling or any other type of therapy or medical advice. My comments about the material are backed by scientific evidence, life experience, and expressions of my opinion. Each participant's results depend upon his or her unique learning ability, motivation, commitment, and other factors. When you participate in these virtual personal development events, you fully agree that there are no guarantees as far as specific outcomes or results you can expect from using the information you receive on or through this event. Okay, so we're here to talk about unrealistic expectations. Okay, so what are unrealistic expectations? So there's three different things that pertain to unrealistic expectations. One of them are goals that require more energy, skill, talent, and time than you have available in order to achieve it. It also leads to falsehoods that are created for future events that haven't taken place yet, and we apply them to ourselves, other people, and life circumstances to not feel out of control. That is the key words there, to not feel out of control. Okay. And where does it come from? Where do these three negative behavioral patterns, which, unrealistic expectations is one of them. There's also perfectionism, self-centered fear. Well, it comes from our perception and how we were raised and the beliefs that we basically took on as a child, and the behaviors that came along with it, and our culture. So my definition for where this came from, it is a learned behavior from our upbringing, coupled with influential environmental factors that is perpetuated by insidious, destructive, unintelligent beliefs stored in our subconscious that influence our thoughts, feelings, actions, results every single day. And when I say destructive, unintelligent beliefs, meaning it could be a belief such as I'm not good enough, what's wrong with me, I did something wrong, why don't people like me, whatever you can come up with that is kind of going against yourself, putting yourself down, is basically an unintelligent belief that's stored in our subconscious, and it's learned through our upbringing on a few different things, such as attachment theory, how our parents communicated, how our parents treated us, and maybe how we saw how our parents treated each other, whether they were avoidant, they were anxious, or they were secure, or anxious and avoidant. It also has to do with how the communication style, right? Were you passive? Were you passive aggressive? Were you aggressive? Or did you have parents that were assertive? And also how people spoke to you outside of the home could have a huge influence on, things that we basically store in our subconscious and how we perceive life in general, which affect our thoughts, right? Our feelings, our actions, and our results. So just to give you an example, of that. Say you were bit by a dog when you were young, you may develop the belief that all dogs are bad. So what happens when you see a dog? The thought comes up, oh, all dogs are bad, based on the fact that you had a belief that all dogs are bad. And the thought is, oh my God, that dog is not good. And the feeling that comes up is fear. And that fear basically turns into an action, which is I'm getting the hell out of here. And then the result is, okay, if that dog is over somebody's house that you were supposed to go over for a friend or whatever, you're never going to go over that person's house, right? And then the cycle just keeps going. It's like a circle. It just perpetuates, 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 and slowly but surely that just becomes, through neuroplasticity, when we build a thought, basically that becomes a habit where we just basically are, become trapped by that subconscious belief. Okay. So what are some unrealistic expectation examples? Some of us think that life should be fair, which we all know that life is hard. It's not always fair. Opportunities will just fall into my lap. Yeah, sure they will. In another reality, maybe you have to do some work to have opportunities just fall into your lap. People should know what I want, agree with me, or know what I'm going to say. Yes, we'll talk about thinking traps later on, but no, none of us are mind readers. I'm going to fail. That's the difference between having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? Things will make me happy. Extrinsic motivation, right? We'll talk about that. I could change anyone. How many of us have been in relationships where we get into them and think that we could change somebody and it just doesn't happen, right? So these are some examples of unrealistic expectations, okay? So how do we create healthy expectations? Which expectations do we want? Well, there's some concepts that most people never heard of or were never taught. And, these things are big in positive psychology, which I'm trained in, self-efficacy, grit, motivation, habit change, high quality connections, relationships, expectations. Okay. This is only a few things that I'm covering in my Get Real Deal and Heal course. The module has many more things that are covered. This is, if I couldn't cover everything in the time that I wanted to. If I put everything into this particular PowerPoint, we would run out of time. But if you are interested in learning more about unrealistic expectations, I'll go over how you could go to my website and see how maybe if you're interested in the Get Real Deal and Heal course, and I'll show you what that's all about, okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is self-efficacy. So what is self-efficacy? Well, it refers to an individual's belief in his or her capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce specific performance attainment. And this that came from Bandura, and these are just articles that references from 1977, 1986, and 1997. And an example of this would be a person who's just accepted a job position in a role she has never performed before, but feels that she can learn and perform her job well. So self-efficacy is basically tied closely to a growth mindset. Really, you're not fearful to take on things that you think that you could handle because you feel like you have the capacity to grow and learn. And here are some things that are tied to self-efficacy. Performance experience, basically that has to do with your past experiences. I always say that when it comes to certain situations in your life that happen presently, you should refer, you don't want to live in your past, but you should have those past experiences that you went through that may have been difficult as guideposts in your life, because they are evidence that you have gotten through something that was very difficult, which means that you can get through whatever you're going through right now. So for instance, it could be, I lost my job in the current situation, but in the past, you've lost your job before and were able to get a new one. So we're so quick to just focus on the negative and what's going to happen to us. And we place unrealistic expectations on us that, oh, it's too hard to get a job, it's this or that. But you do have the evidence. If you've done it before, you could do it again. Your vicarious experience, observed experiences, or modeling by others. Social persuasion, coaching and feedback. Imaginal experience, visualizations of future success, right? Visualization is key to manifesting some of the things that you want in your life. Physical and emotional states, experience of physical and emotional sensations, right? Really important to be in tune with your thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. Okay. So what are some things that cause low self-efficacy? 5 things low self-efficacy increases. So if you don't have high self-efficacy, you're basically avoid accepting challenges as basically you feel failure. So again, that falls back into a fixed mindset. You're basically just saying you're living in a belief, like a belief system. Remember, I talked about those unintelligent beliefs that you're not good enough, right? And I like to say that if you're experiencing trauma is kind of the hidden thing that causes us, if we've never healed some unresolved trauma, you're going to feel stuck, right? Because you're always going to have some of these beliefs that are holding you back because of something that happened to you that was never addressed. So if you are experiencing some type of trauma, it's very important for you to address that. Okay. And what I'm trying to teach people here is, yes, you go to therapy, you deal with your trauma, and you're able to get over it. But then what comes next? What do you learn in order for you to live a flourishing life and really find out what your passion is? Like, what were you meant to do on this earth? What special gifts do you have? Therapy doesn't teach us that, but positive psychology teaches us concept and skills in order for us to live a flourishing life and also become our own CBT, cognitive based therapists, to not get caught up in the assumptions, the unrealistic expectations, the self-centered fear, and the perfectionism that could hold us back from being curious in life. Okay. They firmly believe that they are not capable of performing complicated tasks. They focus on failures and adversities as personal shortcomings. They lack a sense of commitment to their work. They have a hard time recovering from setbacks and underachievement. So you don't want to have low efficacy. It's like a muscle. You want to build that muscle up. And the way that you build that muscle up is experiencing life things that increases your resiliency, okay? And the ability to bounce back quicker from adversities, and not letting fear of the unknown stop you from doing the things that you want to do, because fear of the unknown is just a myth. It's just a thing that we've made up. In nature, you see your dogs, you see squirrels, they're just doing, there's no fear of the unknown, right? We've been given this neocortex, which basically allows us to reason. And we make up these things, and societal things such as the negative news, social media, all these things contribute to us being fearful. And we have to break free from that, right? And not be brainwashed that we can't achieve great things. The only thing that is holding ourselves back from achieving those things is us, ourselves, okay? So how do we boost self-efficacy? Well, we have role models. Like for myself, I have, even though I'm a coach, I have a coach, right, who I talk to bi-weekly, who helps me, who I really like, who I want to become, and, helps keep me grounded, so having role models is a big thing. Having a cheerleader, somebody who's got your back as well. That could be an accountability partner. It could be your spouse. It could be, whomever you have in your life. It could be a coach. Like I consider my coach my cheerleader and my role model. You have to learn to manage your stress appropriately. How do we learn to manage our stress appropriately? Well, we do certain things that provide intrinsic motivation. If you like to exercise, that's great. That'll help you manage your stress. You learn how to breathe properly, maybe doing some breath work, right? Meditation, listening to affirmations, listening to positive podcasts. One of the two podcasts I listen to, one is The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes, and one is by Ed Milet. I can't remember the name of it, but I also listen to Deepak Chopra. I listen to Tony Robbins. I listen to a bunch of influencers. Like those are like role models, people who have gone through these experiences, right? We also have to master experiences we gain when we take on new challenges and succeed. We have to try new things. We can't let fear basically get in our way. Maybe we want to learn the guitar. It was something we always wanted to do, but we don't allow ourselves to do that. You also have to know your strengths, right? What are your strengths? That's your strengths and your weaknesses. One of the things that I created when I was 22 years old, when I was going through some of the things I was going through, I created what's called the 9 ingredients of love. And one of those 9 ingredients of love is humility. And humility, if you look up the definition, is knowing your weaknesses and faults, your strengths, and knowing those things, right? It's important to find out what those are. And lastly, you want to savor your wins. You want to be able to celebrate when you do something great, even if it's like you set some goals, which I do talk about in the module, which is part of this unrealistic expectations, but I can't go over here because it would take too long. Setting SMART goals, micro goals, things that basically you are doing to achieve something that you've always said you wanted to do, but you've always been holding off out of fear. Okay. And these are the effects of self-efficacy, the sources of self-efficacy beliefs: prior experience, feedback, I know I can do this job, and behavioral patterns. Be active, select best opportunities, manage the situation, avoid or neutralize obstacles, set goals, establish standards, plan, prepare, practice, try hard, persevere, creativity to solve problems, learn from setbacks, visualize success, limit stress. And what is the result of doing all these things? Success. Okay. Another thing you have to develop too is grit, right? And what is grit? Sustained interest and persistent effort in the passionate pursuit of long-term goals. And people who basically have grit and build this grit muscle report experiencing more happiness than those who are less gritty, even when controlling for age and education. People who have grit, really work on that, have higher GPAs than their non-gritty classmates, even with lower SAT scores. And it's real big to teach our kids about grit. We don't want our kids to learn bad habits, right, in the very beginning of their lives, which would cause them to have developed some of these beliefs. I'm not good enough. What's wrong with me? I did something wrong, right? We want to teach them about growth versus fixed mindset. We never want them to, of course, it's normal to have feelings of fear, but that shouldn't stop us. We could always start down the fixed mindset where we're fearful of taking on a project, but then there's always the detour to hop on that growth mindset path, right? Having feelings is part of being human. We have to feel our feelings. We have to be able to express those feelings. Feelings are normal. The only dangerous thing is when people get stuck in the emotions such as anger or jealousy or rage or frustration, which can lead us to spiral down the rabbit hole of despair, depression, anxiety, which then causes us to become sick physically. A huge part of why people get cancer, get sick, is because of their mindset, because they're holding on to some type of trauma or some unrealistic expectations about themselves. One of the big things that causes unrealistic expectations is the way people talk to us. There's a thing called people praise, and there's a thing called process praise. And people praise could basically be where if someone has told you your whole life, oh, you're so smart, You always get A's. You're so smart. You're brilliant. You're brilliant. Well, that could cause us to have an unrealistic expectation and also perfection on ourselves because, we put pressure on ourselves because we think, okay, if I get a bad grade, then what are people going to think about me? Right? More so perfection, but also an unrealistic expectation as well. And the difference and what we're trying to strive for is process praise by asking questions and to our kids or to our significant other or whoever we're speaking to about their accomplishment. Oh, what did you do that was so great that got you to where you are? And that person will talk about it so as if, oh yeah, this is what I did. And you're like, okay, keep doing what you're doing because it really shows. That doesn't diminish somebody. It doesn't give them some false unrealistic expectation about themselves. It makes them want to continue their behavior. Okay, so some keys to becoming grittier. We talked about this, the difference between growth versus fixed mindset. Hold a growth mindset. Failure is an opportunity to grow. I can learn to do anything I want. Challenges help me to grow. My effort and attitude determine my abilities. Feedback is constructive. I am inspired by the success of others. I like to try new things, right? We don't want to have a fixed mindset where failure is the limit of my abilities. I'm either good at it or I'm not. My abilities are unchanged. I could either do it or I can't. I don't like to be challenged. My potential is predetermined. When I'm frustrated, I give up. Feedback and criticism are personal. I stick to what I know. This is not what we want. We want to have a growth mindset, and we want to teach our children to have that. We want to value mastery, right? We want to appreciate persistence. We want to be achievement oriented. We want to develop resilience, right? Develop that real-time resilience skill. Believe that fear of the unknown doesn't exist. Replace with curiosity. Key here, people, real key here. That's one of the things I wish I could change. If I had one wish, I would be like, if when my children were born into this world, they always were born with a growth mindset and never had fear of the unknown. Instead of fear of the unknown, they were always curious. Just imagine, we've had lots of success in the world with technological advancements and everything. But just imagine what the world would be like and how far more technically advanced we would be if basically people didn't have fear of the unknown, right? Motivation is very important. And this is where I talked about a little bit earlier. There's a difference between intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, why we do what we do. Intrinsic motivation is basically consists of enjoyment, purpose, growth, curiosity, passion, self-expression, and fun because of the interest and enjoyment in the task itself. So I like to talk about intrinsic motivation in a way that basically will fill you up, fill your tank up with things that make you happy, right? You probably know people, or maybe you struggle this with yourself, that you depend upon external things. Maybe you're in a relationship. It could be a little bit codependent where that person is filling a hole for you, right? Some people go into relationships and then when they end, they get right back into one right away without ever taking time for themselves to find out what they really want, find out who they are. Instead, they just settle for less. And that's not filling yourself up with intrinsic motivation because you're depending upon something to make you happy, right? It's okay to be alone. It's okay to sometimes to feel lonely, but as long as you're able to have certain things like going out in nature, you like to hike, you love music, you like to watch sunsets and sunrises. There's certain music and meditation that you do, exercise, yoga, breathing exercises, things that make you happy, volunteer work, getting out of yourself and doing things that bring enjoyment, purpose, growth, curiosity, passion, self-expression, and fun, right? Very important for us. It's part of loving ourselves, becoming our true, authentic self. And not saying we don't need extrinsic motivation, because we do. right? That extrinsic motivation, examples of those are promotions, pay raises, bonuses, benefits, prizes, winning, and perks. We want to become better people and have those things, but those are kind of temporary things, right? If we got a new car, if we got this, if we got that, yes, extrinsic motivation helps us achieve goals, right? But then again, you have to ask yourself, what happens if you don't get the promotion? What happens if you don't get the pay raise or the bonus or the benefit or the prize or whatever it is? You're going to feel miserable, right? So, what do you need in order to not feel miserable? You need to be able to have some intrinsic motivation to make you feel balanced. Okay. Very important when it pertains to having unrealistic expectations upon people, places, and things. What is a habit, right? A lot of people are, more than 40% of the actions we take are governed by habit, not by actual decisions. It's pretty interesting, right? A habit is a learned behavior that becomes reflexive over time. The behavior is often triggered by certain context. For example, you may automatically go brush your teeth after finishing breakfast as part of your morning routine, right? Some of us have great habits, some of us have not so good habits. An example, habits can be changed at any age. That's the good news, people. So let's take an example. Let me go on to the next slide. So how habits emerged. Okay. So as we evolved, we got this neocortex and our skulls couldn't grow any bigger. Thus, we learned to become more efficient with the real estate that we have. These habits are stored in a part of our brain called the basal ganglia. Okay. They're routine behaviors. It's something that basically these behaviors become second nature. All right. And it really pertains to adaptation. Your brain is wired to chunk information and create habits. So where we do this chunking habits is in the basal ganglia, and it's the part of the brain that chunks information to form habits and it really can't distinguish between positive and negative habits. But the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of our brain, which is our rational thinking system, we also have our amygdala, which is our fight, flight, and freeze, right, mechanism. But basically, we have a prefrontal cortex, which is our rational brain, and we have a decision to decide whether or not we want to change a habit, okay, a bad habit, okay. So a habit consists of a cue, a routine, and a reward. Very simple, okay. The cue is always going to stay the same. So a cue is a trigger that tells the brain to go to automatic mode at which a habit and which habit to use. Okay. And basically that's done by our five senses, our sight, smell, taste, hear, or touch. The routine is the physical, emotional, or mental activity that comes from the cue. Okay. So this will always stay the same. And I'll give you an example of this. And the reward helps your brain decide whether the loop is worth remembering, whether you're going to do it again. Okay. So an example would be if somebody smokes cigarettes. Okay. They go to bed. They have to wake up for work at 7:00 in the morning every single day. Well, Monday through Friday. Let's just say Monday through Friday. That would be the alarm clock. And waking up at 7:00 would be considered the cue. Now, what happens when that alarm goes off at 7:00? Well, the routine kicks in. And what does somebody do at 7:00 when basically an alarm goes off and they smoke cigarettes? Well, on their night table, they have a pack of cigarettes, an ashtray, and they have their lighter. So the first thing they do is grab that cigarette, shove it in their mouth, light it up. And what is the reward? Oh, I got the nicotine rush. I'm ready to start my day. Okay. And that just becomes a natural habit, right? And that's part of that 40% that you just automatically do, that your brain just, with your basal ganglia, it's broken into the chunks. It's just something that you do. So how do we change, right, a habit? How do we do that? Okay. Well, in order to do that, we have to change the routine. Okay. The cue is always going to be the same. You always have to wake up at 7:00 in the morning. Okay. You can't extinguish the bad habit. You could only create new ones. So, this goes into neuroplasticity. A neural pathway is a thought. So you have this neural pathway that you're going to smoke a cigarette. It's always going to be there because you could shed it and maybe create a new neural pathway, which we could talk about how we do that. While this one is shedding, this one is getting stronger. But that takes deliberate practice, and it takes constant, takes like 66 days for that to kick in before it finally becomes a strong neural pathway in order to create that new habit. And basically, to break or create a habit, you need to have hope that change can happen. So here is kind of an example. We're using Homer Simpson, right? How it works: use the same cue, provide the same reward, change the routine. So what is this particular thing? Craving for food, basically, okay? So basically, Homer here is, his cue is hunger, right? His routine is having a bunch of cookies. What is his reward? Oh, it just makes him great. He craves more food. That's the whole thing. How do you change that? The hunger's always going to be there. You change the actual cookies to something that's better for you. And what is the reward? You basically feel better. You probably lost a couple of pounds and you feel healthier. Same thing with the cigarette thing. How do you change that if you want to quit smoking cigarettes? Either you put Nicorette gum and maybe your toothbrush on your night table. So that way, maybe, because you don't, sometimes people have a hard time just quitting cold turkey, and you need that nicotine, but slowly over time, you're used to putting something in your mouth. Well, why not shove your toothbrush in your mouth with toothpaste and you start brushing your teeth, right? And slowly over time, maybe you cut out the nicotine gum, right? After 66 days, hopefully, if you do the deliberate practice, you're going to change that habit. Okay, you're going to have a healthier habit, and you're building a new neural pathway in your brain. Okay, some people basically rebound and they go back to smoking cigarettes, but that may be caused because of an emotional event, because you haven't built like resilience skills. There's other things that you have to build up in order to, not the regress back into your old habits. Okay, but for the purpose of this conversation, we're just talking about how you could quickly change a habit. And like I said, in order to do that, you have to have hope. Okay, and what are hope components? Okay, there's 3 different components. There's goals, agency, and pathways. So the goal is the what power, the agency is the willpower, and the pathway is the way power. Okay, this is part of Snyder. Snyder created this. And basically, goals are those that anchor their thinking about the future to specific goals, or are more hopeful. Okay, so you have to think about basically why you're doing it. What is the what power when it comes to smoking cigarettes? Smoking cigarettes, the what power is, I don't want to get lung cancer, right? That's the goal. What's the agency? Those are those that are capable of pursuing goals, who believe in their own capacity, or more hopeful, right? We talked about self-efficacy, willpower. Okay, you have to have the agency to do it. And the pathway, the way power, those that can imagine or plan ways to achieve goals step by step along a pathway, are more hopeful. And that's changing up that routine. So you have to have hope in order to do this. Okay. High quality connections are really important when it comes to unrealistic expectations. And what are high quality connections? Relationships as a pathway to flourishing. Other people matter, right? We talked about attachment theory, how people form bonds with each other. Some people are avoidant. So we gave an example of someone who, a child, what that child experiences versus an adult. So somebody who's avoidant, a child, no preference for parent or stranger. For an adult, don't share feelings. They're avoidant. They won't get into relationships. They're scared to even deal with that. They don't want to be bothered out of fear. Then there's secure. That's what we're striving for, right? Secure is able to separate and seek comfort. That's what the child is looking for. For an adult, healthy self-esteem and trusting relationships, can share their feelings. And lastly, anxious, overly distressed. That's a child, will feel overly distressed. And maybe you could think about like an adult would worry their partner doesn't love them. Okay. If you grew up in a anxious environment, maybe that's what you're suffering right now. So then you don't trust, you're jealous a lot, you know, and that could be, one of the worst things that you could be, and I don't have it listed here, is that you could be anxious and avoidant at the same time. And that's really bad. Okay. So we place this unrealistic expectations upon us and other people, and we don't realize that basically it's us that we need to address, right? Because we learned something that we shouldn't have learned. And obviously our parents did the best that they could for us, but at some point we have to take care of that inner child and take responsibility for our behavior, so that way we can live a flourishing life and hopefully help other people along the way, right? So high quality, these are some questions that you could ask yourself. High quality connection questions: show genuine interest, inject positivity, uncover common ground, offer help and assistance. Okay. Here are some relationship expectations. So here are some 5 unrealistic expectations about relationships. You expect your partner to be a mind reader, and you know what you're thinking, and they know what you're thinking and feeling. Okay. Good relationships never have conflicts. That's unrealistic. Both people don't need to grow for the relationship to survive. Well, if that wasn't true, I guess maybe nobody would ever get divorced, right? Both people need to spend all their time together in a relationship. Okay, that might be a codependent relationship and not so healthy for you. And that relationships are easy. They're not easy. They're as easy as both of you want to make them. So what are 5 realistic expectations about relationships? You work on your own issues and don't expect your partner to fix you. Okay. You ask for what you need and want, and not expect your partner to read your mind. Again, it's always that mind reading thing there, which is one of the main thinking traps that we're going to go over. You both realize that you're human, so when you make a mistake, when a mistake is made, you cut them some slack. It's progress, not perfection. If we really love somebody, and we are able to have empathy for them, because we're human and we make mistakes, then we communicate and try to let them know that our feelings were hurt or whatever. And if that person is basically speaking to you, if you have an a realistic expectation, then that person will apologize and basically be able to change their behavior. When things get tough in your relationship, you don't panic, but write out the ways of discomfort until you're sailing on smooth waters. Couples are going to get into disagreements. And lastly, you're grateful and enjoy what you have and not focus on what is lacking in the relationship. Okay. And listen, sometimes I've been in relationships and I've had to go to therapy to kind of have a third party help me address some of the unrealistic expectations and build healthy expectations. So communication is a huge part of this process. Okay. So thinking traps. What are thinking traps? So thinking traps are habitual ways of thinking that stop us from flexible and accurate thinking. When we are basically in these thinking traps, our limbic system is activated. So there's a difference between your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. And I mentioned the limbic system, which is your fight, flight, and freeze mechanism. Okay. It protects us, all right, from dangers. But we're not cavemen anymore, right? So, that's why we have a prefrontal cortex with a rational thinking system. Those are connected. Your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex are connected. But we want to strive to have 80% prefrontal cortex thinking and 20%, some feeling. You're always going to have some feeling, but when you start to feel yourself get charged up, where maybe it's 51% limbic system thinking and 49% prefrontal cortex thinking, well, maybe then it's time to take a time out, because you start to feel anxious. You start to, lose control, and you're not going to solve anything when you're in defense mode, when you're trying to protect yourself. You're not being open-minded. You're basically just in a place where you're just backed up against the wall, and it's going to be very difficult for you to hear something. So just a little caveat there. So what are some of these thinking traps? Well, we talked about number 7, mind reading, assuming you know what the other person is thinking or expecting another person to know what you're thinking. So you have to speak up. Did I express myself or ask for more information? Jumping to conclusions, believing you were certain of the meaning of a situation despite little or no evidence to support it, right? Always important to gather the facts. Slow down. What is the evidence? And that's what I also teach in my Get Real Deal Heal course, is how you can become your own CBT therapist to find the evidence for and find the evidence against that thought, because they're very good at making assumptions, right? Jumping to conclusions is like making an assumption that has no validity whatsoever. And just look what's going on in the world, the divisiveness. Everybody believes one thing and other people believe the other without gathering the facts, being open-minded. Let's hear what everybody has. It doesn't mean that you have to believe everything that is said, but at least you're open-minded, right? Overgeneralization, character assassination. Look at behavior. Is there a specific behavior that explains the situation? Again, gathering the facts, right? We have a hard time gathering the facts. We're very reactive, right? We have to learn to practice the pause, take a breath, be able to gather the facts. You know, when you're like, for me, I'm a manager, I'm a director of a data center, and I have people that report to me. I had a situation the other day where 2 people were having a little argument. So I had to listen to the one person, gather the facts, listen to the other one, gather the facts, and then really try to, come up with a solution for the actual problem that was going on. But you can't just like point one finger at somebody, at one person, without gathering the whole fact. Okay. That's not fair to yourself. It's not fair to the people in your life. Some people, another thinking trap is tunnel vision, right? So that's focusing on less significant details in a situation while screening out the more important aspects. Include more. What important info did I miss? Magnifying and minimizing. Errors in evaluating events in which the negative aspects of a situation are magnified while the positive aspects are minimized. We want to try to be even-handed. What positive events occurred? Okay. Personalizing, the tendency to automatically attribute the cause of an adversity to one's personal characteristics or actions. So look outward. How did others or circumstances contribute? We're very hard on ourselves. I tie personalizing to perfectionism, okay? Externalizing, a tendency to automatically attribute the cause of an adversity to other people or to circumstances, right? We want to look inward. How did I contribute? Externalizing, maybe you've heard of this before. When you're pointing one finger at someone, you have 3 pointing back at you. And lastly, we talked about mind reading, okay? So here are some additional points to ponder about unrealistic expectations. Again, huge. Gather the facts. You don't have the ability to predict the future or read people's minds. It's just not doable. Sit down, gather the facts, okay? Understand the difference between what you can't and can control. Catch and treat unrealistic expectations with humor when you find yourself doing it. Become vulnerable with your feelings and accountable as to why you're feeling this way. Take your own inventory and don't point fingers at someone else. You could see some of the common themes of the last slide, right? With the thinking traps, how they kind of tie into this. And lastly, learn to have self-compassion for yourself and others. Being human, we are all fallible and it's okay. Okay. So, you're probably familiar with traditional psychology, which focuses on treating mental illness. Vitally important, but does not serve the 85% of population without a diagnosed disorder. And I'm talking about, like, if you have trauma, you should probably go see a therapist or a psychologist, or maybe a psychiatrist if you might need some medicine or something to help you get over that. But then again, once you deal with that trauma, Where do you go after that? And that's where positive psychology comes in, which combines cognitive behavior and humanistic therapies to help you stay north of neutral. Positive psychology focuses on what's right and aims to create more well-being, happiness, and life satisfaction. It's the science of human flourishing, and it covers all these different areas: positivity, engagement, relationships, meaning, achievement, and vitality. Okay. So this is the course that I was telling you about that I created on my website, holisticwellcare.coach. It's an online course, and basically it is called Get Real, Deal, and Heal. And it consists of 7 modules. I just put, this is the 7th module, the transformational toolkit. But here we just went over some of the things that are in the unrealistic expectations module. Okay. Self-centered fear, which is one of the negative behavioral patterns I mentioned earlier, perfectionism, and then lastly, unrealistic expectations. And then I give you the antidotes for these 3. So for self-centered fear, the antidote is basically learning to live in the moment, because self-centered fear is either you're afraid you're going to lose what you have or you're not going to get what you want or need. Unrealistic expectations is gratitude, motivation to give thanks year round. And for perfectionism, we're really hard on ourselves. It's learning to love yourself. And we provide a toolkit, a transformational toolkit to help you. And then we have long game questions and stuff. And this is basically just a breakdown of what it is, how much it costs. And that's the total price for the course. But the price that I charge is $55.55. You may ask, what's $55.55? Why do you charge that particular number? Well, I'm a spiritual person. If you look up like angel numbers, 5555, it has something to do with like personal growth. And then I have the option of adding a coaching after each module to go over what you've learned. And that basically comes out to $555, which if you were to do one-on-one personal training with me, that would be $125 an hour. So do 7 times 125, it comes out to a certain number, and you subtract that number for $555, you're saving yourself $320, plus you're getting all the learning about all this stuff. Okay. So I want to thank you for listening to this. This is my website, holisticwellcare.coach. And I love this quote. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten, right? So you need to ask yourself, am I stuck in a place in my life and placing unrealistic expectations or perfectionism or, self-centered fear in my life? I'm not flourishing right now. If I was to, give you the wheel of life that I do when I coach somebody, and it's broken up into pizza slices, which has an area of your life: business, relationships, career, finances, spirituality, health. And I ask you to rate yourself from 0 to 10. Would you be at an 8 in every area of your life? You have to ask yourself, are you happy in every area of your life? If you're at a 3 in your relationships and a 4 in your health, but other things like your career or your finances are like at an 8, well, maybe you're just not really happy. How many times have we heard millionaires and billionaires jump off buildings, but they had everything that they always wanted? They have all the money in the world, but yet they're miserable. So, you have to ask yourself where you are in your life and whether or not you want to make a change, because we're here for a very short time. So you were meant to do something great. You're capable of so much more. It's just a question of, do you really want to stay stuck, or do you want to move on? So with that, I am going to open it up for questions, comments, and concerns. I see we have Dana, Jazz, Leisha, and Jay still on here. Basically, I've allowed all of you to talk. So if you want to say something, please do so. Jazz, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. It was really great. I don't really have any questions, but
Okay.
yeah.
Listen, I'm going to give you your time back because, I have this till 9, but I knew that if I didn't have a lot of people, I like to at least present the information, and it's recorded. And I always put the recording in the chat, and I send it out to the people who signed up for this, so that way they could watch it again if they weren't able to attend.
So you're gonna
So
send the PowerPoint as
I'm
well,
not gonna
right?
send I'm not gonna
Oh, you're
send
not.
I'm not gonna
Okay.
send the PowerPoint, but I can send the PDF of the
Right, right,
PowerPoint.
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would
So
be great.
if that's something that you want, I could definitely
Mhm.
do that for you.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I am going to ask one last time if I'll type in here my website again. It's www.holisticwellcare.coach. And on my website as well, if you go to the one-on-one tab coaching, I do offer a free 60-minute consultation as well. So if you're unsure about whether you want to take the course or you want to do one-on-one coaching, or you have questions about what we went over, they may think of something overnight, take advantage of that 60-minute free consultation, and I'll be more than happy to talk about anything that you really need to talk about. Okay. Any other things, guys?
No, thanks, Dan. I hope you have a great night.
All right, great. All right, everybody. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to
Thank
stop the
you.
recording and we will call it a night.
Bye. Have a good night.